Good morning. This is Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for today, January 6th, 2021. Well, as of this afternoon, U.S. time, all eyes will be focused on Washington, D.C. to answer the question, will there be an effective challenge to the certification of electors for Biden when the Congress meets to carry out its constitutional mandate to certify the electors? The Electoral College vote, which took place on December 14th. As of now, there are at least 100, maybe as many as 140 Republican congressmen, House members, who are planning to challenge some of the states, the vote in some of the 6 battleground states, and at least 13 senators preparing to object in some form or another of the certification of votes which would give Biden a victory. If any of the 6 battleground states, if 3 of them are overturned through the deliberations of the Congress, it would give the election to Donald Trump. Now, whether or not that happens is somewhat of a long shot, given that the Democrats are completely unified in the House and the Senate against the challenges, and there are splits inside the Republican Party. But we'll see. Stranger things have happened. This is an unprecedented moment. There will be very large pro-Trump demonstrations outside the Congress. But what's also going on, as I reported yesterday, is there is a move to change the Constitution, coming from such military-industrial complex sources as the Washington Post, which had 2 editorials on the weekend calling for eliminating the constitutional mandates given to the Congress and to state legislatures to determine the outcome of the Electoral College vote. Also, to make such changes as to turn voter registration over to the federal government, taking it away from state and local agencies, and also for maintaining the voter rolls, having a universal voter list. And then furthermore, universal mail-in balloting. So this is an effort to change the Constitution coming from the people who have been largely pushing for the coup against Donald Trump, going back to the origins of the so-called Russiagate story. So make no mistake about it, what is being proposed is to consolidate the coup to ensure that Trump is not only out, but that there are changes in the electoral system so there'll never again be an insurgent, such as Trump in 2016, who can win the election, someone who's not controlled by the establishment. It's also a part of the Great Reset, in which you have the move toward a central banker's dictatorship. This was set back by the election of Trump in 2016. There had been moves in this direction going back to the post-2008 crash. How do you take power away from elected representatives and put it into the hands of the bankers? That's been the question that's been batted around by such agencies as the Davos World Economic Forum, central bankers meeting in various places, including especially the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and so on. Now, why is this going on? Well, the financial system's failing. There was never a correction of what led to the collapse in 2008. Instead, what was done was to carry out quantitative easing, funny money, liquidity printing to cover unsustainable debts, and at the same time, a further deconstruction of the physical economy so that the world is below break even in physical goods production. This was sustained by the quantitative easing, that is the banking system, and the debts were sustained by the central banks printing money, which created bubbles, stock bubbles that gave huge amounts of wealth to the upper 1%, like Bezos, by the way, the owner of the Washington Post and Amazon. At the same time, there's now a move to cut off credit to so-called carbon emitters, which include industry, agriculture, energy production, transportation, and infrastructure. And along with this is giving increasing power to the big tech companies of Silicon Valley to control the debate, to censor, to determine what gets covered and what doesn't. Now, the role of Wall Street in this whole operation, this Great Reset, is absolutely clear. Now, those who are trying to blame China, whether it's for the election, the charges of election fraud, or that the Chinese are preparing to take over the United States, they're diverting attention away from the real criminals. The City of London and their allied agencies in the United States tied to Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. This includes now Silicon Valley and big tech. It includes the whole intelligence community of the Five Eyes, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, which means GCHQ, the NSA equivalent in England or in Britain, MI6, the CIA, NSA, and the FBI, all of which have been engaged in operations, including the fabrication of the story of Russiagate and the attacks on President Trump, the regime change coup that's been underway now for 4 years. Now here's more on that. There's a letter from something called the Partnership for New York City, which is made up of a who's who of global corporations centered in New York City, such as BlackRock, Pfizer, Microsoft, the Carlyle Group, and so on, all the bankers and financial institutions and hedge funds. What they said in this letter is that there should be a certification of a Biden victory and a smooth transition. No contesting of electors. They're giving the marching orders to the Congress. And they say one of the reasons for this is we have the worst health and economic crisis in modern history, which is why we have to have a smooth transition and accept a Biden victory. Well, these are the institutions that have created the health crisis by their austerity and privatization of health care. These are the institutions that created the worst economic crisis with their bubble economies and their cutting off credit to the physical economy, and they're doubling down on that by supporting the Great Reset, which would give all control over spending to the central banks acting on behalf of the largest private banks. So this is who was involved in the coup. These are the networks that have been involved in the Biden victory, the alleged Biden victory. And then we look at the team that Biden is supposedly going to bring in if he's certified as president for the Treasury. Janet Yellen. Now, she's always been an advocate of quantitative easing and the green economy. But listen to this. After she left as Federal Reserve Chairman in 2018, she received $7.3 million from speeches she gave to Wall Street banks and investment firms. There were 57 speeches, including to groups like Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, UBS, Barclays, Credit Suisse, Google, and so on. An average of $125,000 per speech. Sounds a little bit like what Hillary did, doesn't it? Citadel Investors, a major money management firm, gave her $800,000 for 3 speeches. A senior advisor for Citadel is none other than Ben Bernanke, her predecessor as Federal Reserve Chairman. Now, who is she bringing in as part of her team? The Deputy Treasury Secretary for Regulation, which means the one who will allow the banks to continue to commit their fraud and swindles, is someone named Wallie Adeyemo, who's currently the Chief of Staff of BlackRock, which is one of the instigators of the financial regime change to take funding and spending power away from elected representatives in the Congress and put it in the hands of the central banks working through technical groups, which will essentially assume the responsibility for protecting the swindlers of the commercial banks, the hedge funds, the shadow banking system, and so on. So you have a BlackRock official being brought in to run the regulatory system. The head of the Economic Council, announced by Biden, is Brian Deese, who's the head of sustainable investing at BlackRock, which means the Green New Deal. So this is what we're looking at if this vote theft is certified in the Congress today. That's the next administration. Now, here's another important thing that people should note. FireEye Cybersecurity, one of the 2 companies that was hacked along with SolarWinds, is now reporting that the hack came from within the U.S., not from Russia. Well, the media is continuing to say it was Russia that did it. So we're seeing the war party using the same tactics as they used with Russiagate, lying about what Russia is doing to cover what our own intelligence agencies are doing, our own intelligence services are doing to destroy the American system. Now, later today, Helga Zepp will be doing a dialogue with me on the question of Julian Assange, that while his extradition to the United States was denied by a court in London, they upheld the argument that Assange is not a journalist and telling the truth is not protected by U.S. law. In other words, no freedom of the press, no free speech, that the FISA courts, the NSA, the CIA can determine what's allowed to be reported and what's not. War crimes cannot be reported, and the reporting of war crimes makes you a criminal if this Assange decision stands. In other words, while he might not be extradited, the arguments for his conviction or for his charges are standing, and that has to be defeated. One of the things that should be done is President Trump should pardon Assange and make sure that none of these charges against him are continued. So we'll have that later today. I think it will be posted on the LaRouche organization, so watch for that. So we'll keep an eye on what's happening in Washington, but most important, stay involved. Don't be demoralized or defeated by what you hear in the media and what you hear in so-called public opinion. The truth is still the truth, no matter how much it's debunked by such sources as mainstream media, the Washington Post, social media, and so on. So I'll be back with you tomorrow. Until then, be safe and keep fighting.